Good morning and welcome to the Point. This week, the focus on the Flint water crisis has intensified. Both Democrats and Republicans have announced that they will have a presidential debate in the state. Democrats in Flint, Republicans in Detroit, and Hillary Clinton has left New Hampshire to go to Flint to talk about those problems. Earlier this week, we sat down with the Senate Majority Leader Arlan Meekhof to talk to him about Flint. Senator, first of all, thanks for being with us. It's a busy time in the legislature as you prepare for another budgeting cycle, but there are some very big issues that you'll also be dealing with, and this is an election year, which doesn't make things easier sometimes. Now, over in the Senate, it's fair enough to say that you guys aren't up for election, but you got 110 friends down on the other end in one form or another that are. So let's start with the thing that we talked about extensively on this show last week with your counterpart. When we had Senator Arlan, we went to Flint and talked to him about the water crisis, what he's been dealing with. He talked in some very clear-headed ways about the steps that need to be taken. Where are we with the Flint crisis from a state's perspective?
Well, a couple of different things, Rick. I want to explain to your viewers that the national narrative is nothing like what's going on the ground. The charity of the people of Michigan and the people around this country reaching out to the people of Flint and donating water. It's so much water that they're actually storing it over at the Air Force Base. And what I would say to your viewers is don't stop the charity, because this may take a little while to get through. An average family uses 400 to 500 gallons of water in a month, and we have citizens of Michigan that don't have clean and fresh drinking water, and it is serious. There's the supplemental that the governor just signed last week here in Grand Rapids, and that's emergency funds to look at health issues, do some assessments, do some measuring of lead in water and some of the water lines. And because of that largesse of the people of Michigan and all the water that they've donated, we've been able to redirect some of the funds instead of buying water and filters to be able to look at the health needs and assessments of some of the children, because these could potentially have long-lasting effects.
And that is, from the governor's perspective, a down payment on what the state may have to do going forward. I make the assumption that he will at least ask for another appropriation in this next budget process, and that could go on for a number of years in his estimation. Do you share that?
Well, I'll back up even further. I mean, when it was found that we needed to change the water over immediately, we appropriated the $9 million to change over to Detroit water. We did that as quickly as possibly could be done. The governor asked for this $28 million. It was done nearly in the same fashion because we believe there are needs that need to be met. It is especially troubling that these citizens don't have fresh water, and we're doing everything we can to be compassionate and understanding and figuring out those needs. And science is going to direct us on a lot of the solutions, and that's where I'd like the legislature to focus is on the solutions. It is likely to impact future budget cycles. I do expect him to ask for more, and I expect him to ask very, very shortly in the budget presentation he makes in about 2 weeks.
When you look at this process, and frankly, you and Senator Arlan kind of are on the same page when you're looking for solutions, trying to make sure it doesn't happen again, finding out how to keep it from going on. But Senator Arlan, because he lives in one of the houses that was impacted, clearly wants to know what happened to get there in the first place. How much do the two of those things go hand in hand, and how much do they hinder the other? In other words, there are a number of investigations on a number of different tracks that are going on. How many investigations do you need? Who should be doing?
Well, again, I want the legislature to focus on the solutions, the science, and the things that we can do to solve the problems in Flint. I think there's an EPA investigation, there's an independent investigation, there's a federal investigation, there's also the Attorney General. Again, those duplicating those efforts probably don't help get us to solutions and the right science to solve the problem. So again, we're focusing on the solutions, and other folks can take care of the investigations.
When you talk about focusing on a solution, getting a unanimous vote on an appropriations of any significance in the House or the Senate doesn't happen every day, but it did happen.
Correct.
Not only did it happen, if I'm not mistaken, it happened with the water reconnect, which was however long ago that was, and then it happened again these past couple of weeks, even after the changes were made and it went back to the House. It was so quiet at one point, two of my colleagues looked at me and said, was that the bill? Because it was simply, here's whatever it was, 5220 or whatever the bill number was, came up, voted unanimously. This suggests to me, and I understand there are a lot, I don't want to pretend like people aren't fighting about this, because we see the press releases and we hear people talking. That's the political part of it. On the policy part of it, there seems to be a lot of cooperation. Does that give you at least some satisfaction that the legislature, that is sometimes maligned for not getting things done in what people think is a timely manner, are able, when it counts on something like this, that's an immediate need, that you guys can get it done in pretty short order?
Yeah, again, we're looking for partners, not partisanship. And Senator Anik and I work very well together, and we understand the needs of the folks of Flint, and we're doing our best to find the solutions.
As a Senate Majority Leader and a guy who served over in the House, you know your way around the legislature. On the other hand, you're a Senate Majority Leader from about as far west in Michigan as you can get. A little further, but your feet are going to get wet pretty quick if you go too much further west. But you and your colleagues are undertaking a job that I'll say, and it's not my position to spout opinions, but as an observer, a job that probably could have or should have been done a few decades ago, and that's the reorganization of Detroit Public Schools. Now, nobody could have guessed that in the period of years that has just preceded us, that 2/3 of the students in the Detroit Public School would evaporate. Now, clearly they didn't evaporate, but they've gone to other school districts. So this school district that was, 150,000 students is now down to 47,000?
47,000.
So
yes.
You, along with your colleagues over in the Senate, and we presume over in the House, they're working similarly, but the big push right now is in the Senate, Detroit Public Schools. The governor is involved in this. The folks at Detroit Public Schools are involved in this, and I know you guys are working on this. Talk to me from your leadership standpoint. You're the Senate Majority Leader. The guy who's driving the bus on this is a senator from Hart, and the focus is 47,000 kids in Detroit. For some people looking at that, they would say that makes a strange combination. How did that come about?
Well, I'll tell you from my perspective. We have 47,000 kids for whom a system has failed them for over a long period of time. It has not given them the tools to be successful adults or citizens. That's not acceptable. I really want to say that well-rounded in Michigan education is on the rise, and Detroit Public Schools will be one of them. Senator Hansen has done a tremendous job building relationships in Detroit with the mayor, with the civic leaders, with parents, and has introduced some bills that we will take up later this week to begin the discussion, and they're very reasonable, very understandable, and we're hoping that we get a lot of consensus around those bills to get started. And I believe that we will be able to do that. I'm hoping that we will be able to do that.
So you'll have maybe as much as 2 weeks of hearings on these bills.
A number of weeks. I think that's fair to say. The 2 bills have been introduced now, and there'll probably be a series of 4 or 5, maybe 6 other ones. And we're looking at the educational needs of these students, and we're looking at the financial needs of the district. And we are going to have very, very good oversight over the finances. What we're proposing would include up to $70 million a year for 10 years in what would be called the old community school, so that they would collect a millage, pay the debt down, and then the new community school, or Detroit Public Schools, would then get the state appropriated amount per student, relieving them of about $1,100 or $1,200 worth of debt out of their per pupil allowance to apply right to the students, and then begin the process of community leaders, civic leaders, and parents to make sure when we're designing the solution that they have buy-in. We want them to be part of the solution, because it is important. When you have some ownership in the solution, you're going to make it work.
When you talk about $1,100 per pupil, putting that in perspective, the per pupil foundation is $7,000?
Right, but in Detroit they get additional at-risk funds and everything, so it's near $14,000.
Okay,
but those aren't state funds, but they are taxpayer dollars.
But they still have $1,100 of that goes immediately to debt service of some other sort.
Correct.
And that would be rolled back in if you could make this switch. That's also $700 million over the next decade, and the question is, the one you hear every day, how are you going to pay for that, Senator?
Where are you going to pay for that? Because the way that our Constitution is set up, the way we pay for school funding, we pay out of the school aid fund. Okay, all the payments get made out of the school aid fund. How and what you backfill the school aid fund with is a great question that my colleagues are wrestling with right now. What funds are we going to put in there? How are we going to backfill that to make sure that all students in Michigan are moving forward in the per pupil funding, so that their continued education may be upheld as well? It's a big question. It is a big question. I'm not going to kid everybody and say it's going to be easy, because it's not.
One of the questions that everybody has when they hear about these 47,000 children, I don't think there are many people that would say, well, it's not our problem, because it is our problem. If nothing else, by statute, it is the problem of the state government. But moreover, a good education is something most of us agree is fundamental. And in this state, it is a direct function of state government to see that that happens. But the other question that immediately arises in school districts in Zeeland and in Allegan and in Rockford and any place that you have public schools is, wait a minute, if you take $700 million out of the school aid fund over the next 10 years, what does that do to my school?
Again, that's where we're wrestling as a legislature in total. To assume and fix these problems, we're going to also have the Financial Review Commission that's in Detroit currently with the 2 additional members to make sure that if we're going to do this, if this is the way we do it, that the money is spent appropriately and is done to gain on the educational process there in Detroit. And again, what we use or how we backfill that into the school aid fund is all still part of the discussion in the budget that's coming up very shortly from the governor's presentation.
This is going to be an interesting budget because of some of these extra pressures. Last year, the unpleasant surprise about some tax credits, but this budget process has gotten so much smoother over the past 6 years. But this year, it could, I'm not suggesting it's going to take that much longer, but it could be a little bit more animated given all of these questions, some pretty big ticket items from Flint to DPS and some of the other things that have to be done. Right. Do you still get this thing done by the 1st of June?
I think so. I'm very confident in the folks that we have on appropriations. I mean, like you just mentioned, wrestled with some very, very difficult problems, worked their way through them, and I believe we'll find another way to make sure that the budget's done on time and it'll be balanced. And there will be a lot of questions of how we're going to spend and what are our priorities. So, but again, that goes through a very open, very public process, and I believe that will be done in time again.
The Senate has a number of important items on their agenda for this year. We'll talk more about that with Senator Meekhof when we return to the point. Welcome back to the point. Senator Arlan Meekhof is the Senate Majority Leader. As such, he directs what's going to happen in the Senate. And this year, an election year, there's a lot that needs to happen. But what exactly will happen? We talk more with him about that. One of the issues that I have described, you'll correct me if I'm wrong, one of the issues I have described as being as important, both long-term and financially, to the people of the state of Michigan, that is still to be dealt with is the question of energy policy within the state. We focused on roads. When I say we, not just the legislature, but all of us that were covering the legislature for 2.5 years. Roads. When are you going to do roads? When are roads going to be fixed? When are roads going to be fixed? You came up with a roads deal that presumably will start to see results. Democrats, I should point out, say it won't happen nearly quickly enough. Others say that it's the right ramp up. We'll let history be the judge. But when it comes to energy, this is a process that was done back during the Granholm administration. It was done before that. There have been big questions about a fully regulated system, having some choice within that system, having more renewables within that system. Senator Mike Knopf's, I believe, has been in the last 2 rewrites of the energy policy, and he is leading the charge over in your chamber now. That's something that's going to get kick-started here pretty quickly, isn't it?
Yeah, Chairman Knopf is about to release the information that he's been working on in terms of bill package. I think you laid out the things quite accurately. Energy policy is something in Michigan that it's not fully regulated, it's not fully deregulated. We're somewhere in the spectrum. Some would say in 2008 we went too far one way, and with saying renewals had to be in there. And I think we're seeing now that a number of the renewables are making some sense, so they may be included in there because the market commands them to be in there. And we have lots of other consumers of electricity that want all green energy, so there's going to be some demand for it to be created. The choice piece is very, very important to a lot of people. It really is important to our schools and a lot of public buildings who access that and get a pretty substantial savings. The other piece that you didn't mention, I think, is Senator Knopf is working on, is because the federal government has changed the air standards, the EPA standards, a number of our coal-fired plants are not in a position, if they invested a lot of money, they wouldn't function well. So there's probably going to be some that get shut down, and we might have to build new energy generation. So in that case, who gets to build it? Who gets a bid on it? How is it qualified? All of those types of things. And is it one big plant? Is it several small plants? Is it other kinds of generation? Are there other things that we could do to be more efficient with energy that we don't have to build one right away? All of those questions, Senator Office is our most senior official, if you want to say it that way, on energy policy, and he has to work through the caucus and through his committee to get something done, and I'm very confident he will do that.
This is a tough sell because you've got, this may be one of the issues that relies less on partisan divide than it does on policy divide, because you're going to have some Democrats and Republicans that are going to be on the same page on some of these things, fighting against a coalition of Democrats and Republicans, because there are a lot of different views. You did point out something that I think is exceptionally important. There are half a dozen big plants that will likely close, coal-fired plants that will close, and one of the leading, and we don't know until we decide, as you point out, how they will be bid out, all of that. But one of the best guesses is that some of these will be from natural gas, the gas-fired of
conceivably. Right now, gas is the cheapest fuel, so that would be part of the equation as well, yes.
But that also puts us at the mercy of a commodity that can fluctuate relatively wildly if we do that. So that's got to be a consideration too. You got to look at the long-term reliability and cost reliability, because coal, for all of the other things that may malign it, has been a relatively steady cost. It doesn't fluctuate wildly.
Steady cost. Nice supply. There's a nice supply of gas as well. So I think you're going to see hopefully a balanced portfolio of generation in there, so that we don't rely too heavily on one or the other. And I think Senator also will find the right medium of that.
Does that get done before summertime, or is that going to carry into the fall?
That would be the goal, to try to get done before summertime.
All right. Let's talk about something else you've heard a lot about, and we were talking about this before we went on the air. It is interesting that sometimes a piece of legislation can be, if not read, at least an analysis read by two groups of people that may be politically more or less on the same page, but they come away with two very different understandings of what that bill means. 571, is that the bill?
Senate Bill 571.
Senate Bill 571. I'll describe what I think it means, then you tell me what you think it means since you were involved in it, and then we'll talk about what some other people think it means. Senate Bill 571, as I understand it, was designed to keep public resources from being used to promote millages, tax increases, issues of any kind, not using taxpayer money to provide political services. That may be too simplistic. What was your view of that bill?
It simply says public entity advocating for a millage of any sort would not be able to use taxpayer money to advocate for that. It doesn't say they can't advocate. They could do just like everybody else. They could form a committee, raise the funds, advocate for or against, or whatever they would wish to do. A public entity typically would use public money to do that, taxpayer money, to say, I want you to vote for this millage for whatever reason. But also, we don't give taxpayer money to people who want to advocate against. So it's a fairness issue in one, and I believe that it's being misinterpreted as some sort of abridgment of someone's free speech rights, and that's not in there. And if you've read the bill, and if members or other folks have read the bill, it's not in there.
Yeah, a gag order is what people who called it, who have filed a lawsuit, a federal lawsuit, if I'm not mistaken, against it, that will be dealt with however it's dealt with. But let's say that, for example, I'm a sheriff, and in our county we are trying to raise a millage to build a new county jail because we're overcrowded, maybe about to come under some federal jurisdiction. As a sheriff, I can still talk about that.
Absolutely.
And I can still go out to the Rotary Club and talk about it, even if it's in the middle of the day, if I'm on my lunch hour, presumably.
Certainly.
Right?
Yep. Public access television, interviews, return phone calls or emails to constituents, absolutely.
But I just can't, for example, it would be ill-advised under this law to have a big informational session at the county sheriff headquarters.
That would probably be across the line, yes. So
for some groups who have taken legal action and some who have just said, we can't talk about anything, we can't, is it from your explanation, they either misunderstand or misapplying that law from your perspective?
I would say they're misinterpreting that, correct.
And is there going to be, I know over in the House there was some talk of maybe shortening the time period from 60 days out to 30 days out. Is that a piece of legislation that gets traction?
They are working on something in the House. Representative Lyons is working on some clarification language there that would make it even more clear, I think. And that has not come out of the House yet, but they're still working on it.
Talk to me a little bit, and there's a lot more to talk about. You're going to have a very busy year. I hope to have you back. We always enjoy going to what I always say is the best office in the Capitol building and coming over and visiting with you there. But since I've got you here, let's talk a little bit about this process. It has been an interesting period of time that you have served in the legislature. It has been one of the worst economic times that we've seen in a few generations, followed by what is now a pretty healthy recovery. The auto industry, for example, had its best year ever last year, and nobody can deny that when the auto industry does well, Michigan does well. In the time that you have left in the Senate, what are the things that you would like to get accomplished? Understanding you've got to get 19 others to vote along with you, you got to get a House and the governor and all of that, but as the Senate Majority Leader, you do have the prerogative to steer the issues, some of the issues that get dealt with. What are some of the things that are on your long-term list?
Well, we started on a little bit of that, enabling Michigan to be in the mix when you talk about technology services and things like that, with the announcement of Switch coming to Michigan. And I think people misunderstand what a game changer this is, that this company never had Michigan on their radar. And because we are uniquely located and with weather, believe it or not, they liked our weather because cooling servers makes a lot of sense when you're in a cooler climate. We don't have hurricanes and we don't have earthquakes very much, so we're a very stable atmosphere, and we have a good power grid for them as well. And this is the wave, I think, one of the waves of the future. Data, information. This company, let's give you the example that they gave me. From the beginning of time to the year 2000, there's X bytes of data about information. Switch can process that much data in 10 minutes. They're storing and housing data for companies and managing it for them. This is a unique part of the internet. It's the iCloud, is what it is. And I believe we're going to see some great benefits from that. We have a lot of work to do on corrections policy. We do have a very large population of people that are in our correction system, and all too often they come back. So we need to find a better way. If it's corrections, what are we not doing well, so that when they get out, or maybe on the front end, to divert them from being in further trouble so that we can reduce our expenses. And it is very, very expensive, and we're one of the more expensive states in the Midwest. So we have a lot of work to do in that.
There are many other issues that we are going to talk about over the next 3 years. One of the final things, when you look at the cooperation between the House and the Senate and the governor, and you guys took some heavy knocks during the roads bill because everybody was watching with a magnifying glass. How is that cooperation going forward?
It is very good. Speaker Cotter and the governor and I meet on a regular basis. I think people don't realize that we're regular people too. We drive on the roads, we see the impacts, we hear from our friends and neighbors, probably even more because we're in elected office. And we feel and want to understand and want to do the best we can for the most people. And I want your viewers to know that as well.
We're back with more To the Point in just a moment. Finally today, the Flint water crisis. As I said at the top of the show, Republicans and Democrats have both decided to have presidential debates here in the state just prior to the March 8th primary, largely in response to what's going on in Flint. We, of course, will cover both of those events and all of the candidates as they start to stream into the state after Super Tuesday. The presidential primary will be important here in Michigan. We hope you'll join us on Sunday mornings when we talk about it. To the Point.